I've got 1:00 p.m. in Fort Collins, Colorado, so I'm gonna get us going here, and very, very grateful. Regina, Saskatchewan feels like -24. I don't know if that's Fahrenheit or Celsius though, so I'm not sure if I can relate either way here. So it is snowing in Fort Collins, Colorado at 1:00 in the afternoon on Thursday here. My name is Paul Caputo. I am the acting executive director for the National Association for Interpretation. NAI is one of 7 partner organizations that make up the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation. And this installment is part of our year-long free webinar series with partners from around the world, literally around the world, presenting on interpretation in their corner of the world. And so we have, as part of the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation, we have Interpretation Australia, we have in Mexico, Interpat MX, Interpretation Canada is part of the organization, Interpret Europe, obviously NAI, as I just mentioned, and INNZ, the Interpretation Network New Zealand, who you'll be hearing from today. And so I'm very pleased to hand off the reins to Laura Simmons. Laura, thank you so much. I hope you all enjoy the session, and we thank you for being here.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Tēnā koutou e hoa mā kua tai mai nei I tēnei ata. Tēnei koutou katoa. No mai, hera mai ki Interpretation Network New Zealand. No mai ke tēnei hui. Ko Tahoma te monga, ko Mississippi te awa, no whanganui atara aho. Ko Laura Simmons toko ingoa. Ke Chair Interpretation Network New Zealand, aho I Mahi ana. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings and welcome to the Interpretation Network New Zealand's Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation webinar. I just introduced myself with a Maori mihi or greeting in accordance with tikanga or Maori custom. I'm Laura Simmons and I'm the chair of Interpretation Network New Zealand, otherwise known as INZ. Welcome. I'd like to start today's session with a short karakia or blessing. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa ponamu te moana, he huarahi mā tātou, I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I o tātou katoa, huie, tahi. May peace be widespread, may the sea be like greenstone, a pathway for us all this day. Let us show respect for each other, for one another, bind us all together. We've got a great session for you today, featuring 2 projects in Auckland on the North Island of New Zealand and in Christchurch on the South Island of New Zealand. Both projects have been true partnership projects with Mana Whenua, or the local Māori who have territorial rights to the area. They both make great case studies for global excellence in heritage interpretation, which is what this webinar series has been about. After each session, we'll have a bit of time for questions and answers, which I will moderate. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Don Bardsley, who's going to talk to you about Te Kete Rukuruku, which is a project that's been happening in Auckland, or Tamaki Makaurau. Over to you, Don. I think you're muted. Don, are you there? I think you're muted. Oh, I still can't hear you. Oh, there you are.
And I was writing in the chat going, I'm so sorry. Okay, so was that was that an introduction for me? I'm sorry, I missed it.
That's an introduction for you. Sorry.
Right. So, yep, I'll hand over to me. So shall I, I'll introduce myself. I'll share my screen and just make sure that that works. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Do that first. Hopefully that goes swimmingly. There we go. Can everyone see that? Fantastic. All right. Okay. So, yeah, i ngā hui wha, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I te kai karakia tēnā koe, Lara, no kingitanga ko tahi o ko tupuna, I whānau mai o e te papa I oia, I tupu ake o e Tamaki Makaurau, no Aotearoa aho. Ko Taranaki toko kuranga manga, ko Mangatoki toko kuranga awa. ko te tai o rehua toko karanga moana, ke muruai aho I noho ana, ko Dawn Bardsley toko whenua. So I've just introduced myself in Māori. My name is Dawn Bardsley. I've worked in parks and project management for around 25 years now on a number of different projects. But a key theme to my mahi over that time has been working with mana whenua, local boards and local communities and various roles in the park space. I'm currently contracting to council as the naming lead for Te Kiri Rukuruku, which is a program to return Te Reo Māori and Māori names and stories to the land and through the naming of parks. And I've been doing that now for around 2.5 years. So it's been an awesome project. I've learned so much, and hopefully I can share some of that with you today. So I thought I'd start off with just a few definitions of some of the words that I'll probably be using and when I talk, and it's hard not to sometimes because they don't translate particularly easily always into English. So the first word, Māori, which is not meaning Māori as in the people, but Māori as in the life force. It's like an essential quality or the vital essence of something, an entity, an object. Could be anything. It's like the life force within that is what that one means. Mana, which is prestige, authority or status. It's like it's a type of supernatural type force in a person, place or object, and the more prestigious the event, the person, the place, the more it is surrounded by mana. It has mana. When you attach the word whenua to that, whenua is the word for land. Mana whenua is who we work with in the program, and they are the Māori who have historical and traditional rights over the land in Auckland. So Auckland Council recognises 19 different tribes who have interest in the Auckland area. And these tribes all have histories, legends and stories that are based in the land that they have occupied here, that the ancestors have occupied here for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is different from Matapopore, who are the Māori who they're still Māori, they still may live in Auckland, but they don't necessarily have those links to the iwi, the ancestral tribes that lived in Auckland. They may have a link to a tribe outside of Auckland, or they may have unfortunately lost those links through time. So we deal with mana whenua through our project and not with Matapopore. Then we have the iwi, that's just a name for a Māori tribe. And as I said, there's 19 that are associated or have an interest or connection in the Auckland area. And local boards, that's the other key partner in our project. They are a publicly elected board. They vary between sort of 6 and 9 members. The elections are held every 3 years at the same time as our mayor and councillors. And they represent the areas, like a small area within Auckland, so a couple of suburbs normally. And they have the delegated authority for the naming of parks and places within their local board area. And just to give you a bit of context, the presentation I'm giving you today is focused more at a practical level of what we've achieved and how we've achieved it. I just really wanted to make it clear that I'm not mana whenua. I'm not speaking on their behalf or representing their views or opinions of the program. I'm talking to you from Te Kiri Rukuruku perspective, from an operational perspective, but I was thinking that maybe something in the future, if you do more of these webinars, might be something really nice to do, would be to get some of the mana whenua involved along to talk about it from their point of view. Okay, so Te Kiri Rukuruku, what are we? The name comes from, it means a kiti is a little basket, so Te Kiri Rukuruku is a small finely woven basket. It actually comes from a whakatoki, which is a proverb talking about when the Māori ancestors first came across to Aotearoa back in the 1300s on the Waka, Tainui and Te Araha. The ancestors hand carried a small basket containing kumara and taro seeds. And when they arrived in New Zealand or in Auckland, they planted those seeds. And that was, you know, a huge source of sustenance for them throughout the generations. So that story carries through to what we're trying to do in Te Kiri Rukuruku. Mana whenua wish to nourish the new generations through the seeds of the treasured stories. So that's how it links into what we're doing and where that name came from. And it was really interesting because I listened to a couple of the other webinars earlier in the week just to get a bit of an idea. It was really interesting, actually. I listened to the Canadian and Australian one. And Chuck Lennox, who I believe isn't here today, but hosted those, he said, interpretation is a seed, not a tree. So let's go forth and plant those seeds, which I thought was really interesting and tied in so well to the whole, the vision behind Te Kiri Rukuruku. So that was, yeah, I thought that was quite cool. So yeah, Te Kiri Rukuruku, it's a storytelling program. It was set up in 2017 to tell the stories of the mana whenua of Auckland. The naming of parks and places became a core component of the program after feedback from mana whenua that they weren't happy with how the naming process was currently working. So we brought that into Te Kiri Rukuruku, and that became a component of this, because obviously the names reflect a lot of the stories that we're trying to tell anyway. So it's a great addition to the program, and it's become a really valuable part of it. It provides the opportunity for mana whenua to restore some of the Māori and the mana to the land. So it helps to mitigate some of the past injustice and retrieve some of the loss of connections that have occurred over time and through what's happened over the last 100 or so years since colonisation. The first names were adopted in 2020, and so far we have adopted 375 names out of, we've got 4,000 parks in Auckland, so it is just a drop in the bucket, but yeah, it feels like we're making really good progress in the right direction. So the scope of our project is the naming, the renaming or dual naming of parks and places. We're working towards increasing the visibility and use of Te Reo. It's one of Council's core initiatives, is to try and have Te Reo Māori. It's an official language of New Zealand, and make it part of people's everyday. The sharing of the stories and the rich Māori histories and values with communities is absolutely vital and such a worthwhile thing to be doing. We've had lots of great feedback throughout the program so far, and that sort of flows on to building and strengthening those relationships with mana whenua. The scope has been finalised in partnership with mana whenua, so they have been involved in this right from the very start, how it's going to work, what we're going to do it, and how we're going to do it. And it does focus on naming, on dual naming. We don't do translation, so if there's a Brown Reserve, we're not going to call it Brown Reserve in Māori. It will have its own individual meaningful name. And it definitely it has been a key shift really in our naming practice. Prior to Te Kiri Rukuruku, we had a system that involved often several names that would be put forward, maybe one from mana whenua, someone from another one from somewhere else, and it would be a little bit of a debate over which name is best and which one everyone liked the most. There might be a lot of consultation around that. There's even sometimes competitions. That is not a process that we support. We really see this as a partnership with Council and mana whenua working together. Mana whenua have the mana, they have the knowledge, the matauranga to present the right Māori name for that site. We don't, so we need to accept and honour that. And that's what we've done. So we've really entered this and we've really changed that process, and we're now working together in that partnership to get these names adopted, which has been working really beautifully, mostly. So this is a bit of a high level summary of our process, just to give you an idea of the basic steps that are worked through. The local board commits to the program and allocates the budget. We do a bit of research, some high-level research on the origins of the names that are already there. The project team workshop with the local board and mana whenua to look at the research that we've got and consider options for what sites are going to be selected for the tranche 1 list. As I said, we've got 4,000 sites, so each local board's got hundreds and hundreds of parks. We need to just bite off small chunks of that. So we select, well, the range is 20 to 100 sites to start with, and then we agree on what ones we're going to start naming first. The local board then publicly resolve to name those sites. So that's a very public process. It's very visible and transparent. People can see, right, we're going to go out and we're going to be getting some Māori names for these sites. Once that is done, mana whenua then get together and agree on how that naming is going to work, who's going to name what. There are often, we have 19 mana whenua in Auckland, so there's generally at least 2 or 3, sometimes 6 or 7 mana whenua working together in a local board to provide some of those names. So once that's been agreed, they'll go away and do their own research. They'll come back to TKR with the names that they would like to put forward. These are presented to the local board and they are adopted as given. Then they go on our website, signage, that sort of thing. And that's when the public learn of the names and when the public consultation, or not consultation, the public information is disseminated. We often have a little ceremony called a whakarewatanga in one of the parks involving local schools and things and local community groups, just to share some of that story and share some of the journey, take them along with us on that journey. There's obviously some key issues and considerations that are involved in the process. We do have 19 mana whenua, it's a lot, and there are generally more than one in each local board area. That can present itself with some challenges for how they're going to work together, particularly when some iwi feel they may have a stronger connection to a particular area than others, or are not comfortable with other iwi naming in an area alongside them. So that's been a challenge in some of our local board areas. Some areas we haven't been able to resolve. Other areas have gone really smoothly, and we've worked through those discussions beautifully, and iwi are happy to agree on how that's going to work. We do have a couple of local board areas where we haven't been able to achieve that, and we're still discussing it, where one iwi in particular feels that we should be dealing with them alone and no other iwi. And of course, there's other iwis that have longer histories there that also feel that they should be able to share their story. So it's a little bit of a tricky situation sometimes for us that we have to do our best to manage. And there's lots of different ways we try and resolve that. Obviously, the ideal way is for mana whenua to resolve it themselves, to have a kōrero, have a chat about it and work out how that's going to work for them. It doesn't always work. We have, in what is another solution, we have gone and used an independent historian to get some of the ancestral names, and then we've worked with all the individual mana whenua to agree on ancestral names that they all support being returned. So that's been a way that we have worked through some of that, those issues. But yeah, it can be a challenge in that space sometimes. We have got 16 of the 21 local boards in the program. We have 5 that haven't joined us yet, through a variety of issues. Some feel that they are happy not going through the TKR process, and they have a relationship directly with mana whenua themselves. And a couple, I think, that just haven't been quite ready to embrace the new process and accept the fact that mana whenua, when the names are put forward, just accepting those names wholeheartedly can be a hard thing to do. So there's a couple that perhaps aren't quite ready for that, but we've got 16 are on board, so we're making really fantastic progress, and hopefully we'll get all of them on board before too long. And then we have, I've got some pictures up here of the knowledge labels. So mātauranga is obviously a big issue, and you know, the knowledge and the IP of the names and the stories, obviously it remains with iwi. It doesn't cross over to council. We don't hold that knowledge or own those names in any way once they come across to us. So we have got a mātauranga agreement, which is currently going up through the process to be signed by our CE. And we're also looking at these knowledge labels, which is something they haven't been sort of rolled out yet, but we have given them an option to mana whenua to have a look at adding these to our signs. And I'd be really interested actually in anyone else's feedback. I don't know if anyone else around the world uses something like this. It would be so interesting to hear if you do. I would love to understand how other people do it, but this could be something that is added to our signs, our websites, where the names and narratives are going as a quick, easy check to say, you know, for example, the $ with the cross through it means, you know, you can't use these for any commercial purposes, which is pretty standard for most of the names and narratives that iwi present to us. The picture of the 4 marae there shows that connects to more than one iwi, the name and narrative. So there's little quick and easy symbols that people could learn over time that would represent the special nature of these names and the fact that you can't just pick them up and put them on the local dairy on the corner, which is something that is of concern to iwi and something we're trying to work towards protecting for them. So yeah, that is another challenge. We haven't had any issues with that yet, but hopefully we never will. But I guess you just have to try and do your best. And yeah, as I said, I'll be really interested in anyone else that has some examples of that. Right, next page. Community involvement. Yeah, the community, as I said, we don't consult on these names. This is a partnership between council and iwi. The community, we have had a few instances where the community feel they should have been consulted, but that's been managed through the local boards, and it's not something that we're going to change with our program. And overall, the feedback and the support for what we're doing has been amazing. I've got some pictures here of a couple of the whakariwatanga, which is like a launching of the names into the community, which we do in one of the parks. There's local schools are involved, local volunteer groups, local residents and key stakeholders are invited, along with mana whenua and the local boards. We talk about the names, we talk about the meaning behind them, the importance of what we're doing and the restoration of it to the parks and places, and it's been really well received overall, which is great. There are a few people out there that have concerns, particularly in the current climate of you know, tight financial situations. I don't know about you know, Auckland Council's running a bit of a deficit at the moment. We do get a bit of feedback about money could be better spent in other places, like fixing potholes is one of the ones that has come up. But you know, there are budgets allocated to all those sort of things. The amount of funding we feel is important for history and culture to be represented. That is well supported. You're always going to get a few people that don't agree with that. We manage our budget very carefully in regards to things like with signage going up. We don't replace signs just because there's a new name. We wait till the renewal is due, or we just over laminate it. So to keep those costs down, we don't go out and rip out brand new signs and things like that. So we do manage that quite well as well, to try and make sure that people aren't upset by these sort of things. And I think one of the keys to the success of this project has been the authenticity of the team. We work together with genuine openness, respect for each other, and are building those relationships that have trust, the boards being able to step into this partnership and saying, we're going to trust mana whenua to come back with the right name for the right space, and we're going to accept that and adopt that, has been a really awesome process, and it's really gone a long way to building those relationships together, which has been fantastic. And I thought I would just give you a little bit of a look at some of the outcome, the actual outcomes on the site that show the visibility of the names. We do some interpretive text in the parks. It's an example of the sign in Tahurangi Crum Park. So we have a fully Māori interpretation text and an English one associated. We have a QR code on there so you can hear the name and the correct pronunciation of that name. And we're also now starting to put the full narratives on those QR codes. You can scan into those and hear that pronunciation. Is obviously something that can be quite difficult for some people, myself included. So it's really great to be able to help people to improve on that. And Tahurangi is a beautiful story about people that were here before the waka arrived. So this is just an example of what we've got on our website. I'm not going to spend too long on this. This is Tahurangi again. It all goes on the website. When people look up the park, you can look it up either by the English name, Crum Park, or the Māori name, Tahurangi. Will come up with both, and it will come up with the full meaning and story behind the name. And there's a link to our website if anyone's interested in having a bit of a play around in there. We also have a heritage collection called our Kura database, which our libraries maintain. We've also got all our names and narratives on there. Again, the link is there if anyone's interested in going in and having a bit of a play, having a look at some of the stuff that's on there. You are more than welcome to do that. And then to sort of finish off, I thought I would just share some of our beautiful names. We have such a variety of names that we have adopted. All different sorts have come through. From there's names that reflect the activities, some of the cultural activities that have occurred in the areas over time. There are names that have sat on the whenua that have been lost, or not almost lost. Traditional names that have sat that are being returned, which is such a wonderful thing to be doing. And I've got another example of a whakatauki or a proverb that has come through, and that name has come through into the park, which is great. This one here, Te Ara Tawhina, which means the curved path. Ara is a path or a road. So this is in reference to an ancient track that was used to access the local waterway, a lot of which is now piped. So a lot of people that would live in the area wouldn't even realise how extensive that waterway used to be. Massive waka used to travel up and down there. They'd stop off at this park, potentially set up camp, do fishing for inganga and tuna, and that was a major thoroughfare for mana whenua hundreds of years ago. So it's sort of telling a bit of that story. There is some links to that, but the name you see in the narrative there's a Tarata Crescent, which is it's been shortened from Te Ararata, which is the correct name of that awa, and that correct name was pretty much lost until we brought this back into the park. And now we've had the volunteer group who were calling themselves the Tararata volunteer group have now corrected their name as well to Te Ararata Stream. They've really wholeheartedly embraced it, so it's been really awesome. Wainganui, this comes from a proverb. It really demonstrates the sense of place that Māori have, and the worldview that the landmarks connect us to these places and connect us to our past. It's sort of described by describing the topography of the land, the natural resources and how it was used. It's a real connector for mana whenua. So we've been able to bring some of that back into these sites. So that's the whakatauki here. It's a description of the location of Papatoetoe, which is a place in Auckland. And this park, Wainganui, is in the centre of Papatoetoe, and Wainganui is the Maori word for being in the middle, being in the centre of something. So yeah, that's and that's a picture of toitoi there, which is one of our native plants. And Te Pua, which is another beautiful story. This is a oh, and I've got a typo there, apologies for that. This is a really beautiful, Te Pua means to blossom, and it's a story about a chieftainess from the local Waihua iwi who was born under a karaka tree when it was in full bloom. So the name of this point down here is Te Rangi o Te Pua Karaka, which the park that is called Te Pua is not exactly on the spot of the karaka tree, but as you can see, this is all residential houses now. So the name has been attached to the park over here. So it's a beautiful story of when Te Pua o Te Karaka was born. When Mum was out fishing and collecting shellfish, and she went into labour and gave birth to her baby under the karaka tree there, and the pito, the afterbirth, was buried under that tree. So yeah, a really beautiful story that's we've been able to bring back into that community. And that's, I think I'm out of time, and I've come to the end of my talk, so I will stop sharing with you now and hand the reins back to Lara.
Ngā mihi, Dawn. Thank you very much. That was very, very interesting. And I think let's wait until after our next presentation, then we'll have a joint question and answer session, which I'll moderate for both. But for me, it's just so inspiring to see all the work that has been done. And I know that sometimes those processes, especially dealing with 19 different people in any capacity, can be quite challenging. And so commending you for going through the process and just embracing it for what it is and achieving results. So thank you, Dawn. And now I'd like to turn it over to Linda Burns and Carrie Whaitiri. They are going to talk a little bit about a project that's been happening in Ōtautahi, Christchurch. So Linda and Carrie, if you can turn on Linda, does your camera and mic work? Sorry, Linda had a few technical difficulties this morning. There she is. Great. So I don't know which one of you is going to lead off, but I'll turn it over to you first, Linda, maybe?
Carrie
first. Okay.
Tēnei te mihi ki a koe, Lara, mō tō karakia, ki a Dawn, mō tō kōrero, me ngā whakaaro. Tēnei te mihi ki te rōpū nei. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Hei te te maunga, ko waio hinganga te awa, ko pētani te marae. Ko kaitahu, ko Kāti Māmoe, ko Ngāti Kahunganau, ngā karanga iwi. Ngāti Tū, Ngāti Matepu, Ngāi te Rūruku, Ngāti Rua Hikihiki, Ngāi te Rūruku, Tūāhuriri, ngā karanga hapu. Yeah, ko kiri whaitiri taku ingoa. So yes, just a mihi ki towards to Lara for your karakia. Really appreciate you following tikanga in terms of opening this session. It's really, really appreciated. And to Dawn for the work that's going on up in Tāmaki Makaurau, mihi towards you as well. Sorry, I mix up my Māori and my English sometimes. So my mihi that I just gave there, my pepeha, talks about the tribes that I whakapapa to. So I might just quickly flick across. I'll just quickly share the screen if that's okay. So you'll see here, this is Tāmaki Makaurau, where Dawn is based. So just giving a bit of context.
Carrie, we're not seeing your screen yet. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
There we go. Now we're seeing it.
So this is Tāmaki Makaurau, where Dawn is based. So the projects that she was talking about are based up here in the North Island, Te Ikawa Maui. So Lara is based here in Te Whanganui-a-Tara or Wellington, and we're down here in Ōtautahi, Christchurch. This is a map that was, from a tribal mapping, cultural mapping project. So I will hand over, I won't talk about what I do, we'll talk about that in the process. I'll hand over to Linda for her mihi.
Kia ora tātou. No irirangi o kutipina, no mirihiku ahau, no Ōtautahi anai nei, ko Linda Burns, tōku whenua. So my ancestors are from England. I was born in the south of the South Island. I now live in Christchurch, where I work for Christchurch City Parks. Today, Kitty and I are going to talk about a project that she's been involved with for over a decade, and for me it was the last 4 years. And it's a project in the central city of Christchurch. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with a little bit of a background as to why this project started and was set up. Then we're going to give you some examples of what we've done in terms of interpretation. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the sort of working together, bringing the two worldviews together, and the sort of collaboration of working with mana whenua, which, thank you, Dawn, has already introduced, are the local people. So, Kitty, I'm going to turn it over to you to give us the background.
Okay, kia ora. So, can you go just back to that previous slide, please? Thank you. So, thank you to Dawn for introducing some of the terms that, some of the te reo terms that sort of come forward. And I suppose we wanted to start with this slide because there was a saying that has now become, I suppose, seeded within within Christchurch in the post-earthquake recovery process, and it's kia atawhai ki te iwi. So this notion of care for the people, and it's so the organisation that I have worked with sort of over the last decade is called Matapopore, and it was established by the local people, mana whenua, within the Christchurch area, called Ngāi Tūāhuriri. So it was it's a special organisation that was set up specifically to engage in sort of post-earthquake recovery, and this was the phrase that began to be uttered by all of the project teams that were sort of working in the earthquake recovery. It's a phrase that comes from Peter Tuhori, the leader for Ngāi Tūāhuriri in 1861. It was something that was sort of brought forward, and as time started to get quite tricky for Māori, sort of that was 10 years after the Treaty of Waitangi was signed, and things started to sort of go a little bit pear-shaped for Māori. So it was a way of kind of keeping people on track, I suppose, and keeping the faith. It came from the eponymous ancestor Tūāhuriri, who was established this particular hapu. So Linda, if you can, next one. Did you want to talk to this?
I suppose the cream office, the grey office, is where I'm now sitting. It still remains, but in 2010 and 11, in 12 Christchurch, of course, suffered enormous damage from earthquakes, with a third of the city centre or more being destroyed. So this was the background to setting up the project that was part of the rejuvenation and the rebuild of the city. So, Kiri?
Yeah, just to sort of backtrack, Christchurch was, when it was sort of first settled by the European settlers, it had very strong colonial aesthetics that came through, and it was, over time became renowned as sort of one of the most English, where is it? The most English city outside of England, is a quote from someone from 1990. And, Mark Twain, when he visited here in 1897, said it was junior England all the way to Christchurch. In fact, just a garden. And Christchurch is an English town with an English park annex and a winding English brook, just like the Avon, and named the Avon. If it had established a church and social inequality, it would be England again, with hardly any lack. So when I was growing up in Christchurch, I didn't realise that it carried the name Ōtautahi. I didn't realise that the Avon River was actually the traditional name for that, was the Ōtāutahi. So a lot of the work that Matapopore sort of set to in the sort of post-earthquake recovery was starting to bring forward those names and those associations with place. Yeah, so maybe next one. Because the earthquake recovery was run by a Crown agency, the notion of kind of like a bicultural approach to the recovery was really important. So that is how Ngāi Tūāhuriri, the local tribe, became involved as a partner to the process of recovery with the Crown Agency, Sarah, and also the Christchurch City Council and Environment Canterbury. So we became involved in these anchor projects, which were basically, Christchurch was, I think 80% of the city was demolished, partially or fully. And so the idea of anchor projects came up, these really key sort of grounding projects that would start to bring people back into the city and provide those spaces. So up on the left-hand side, upper left-hand side is Te Pai, the convention centre. So the structure that you'll see in the front is a mana whenua led structure. The idea of a gateway that will bring you into this very important space. On the right-hand side is Te Omeka, the law courts of the justice precinct, and this was a facade that was designed by one of the artists that we brought on board, and Ngāi Tūāhuriri artists, to sort of work with that to provide a kākahu or a cloak that wrapped around this particular building. The lower left is Tūranga. It's the central library. It carries the name Tūranga only. That was a decision that was made by the Christchurch City Council that to elevate, the te reo name for this important building. Lots of architectural awards here. And on the right is the bus interchange. So the main sort of hub where everyone passes through. Yeah. Next one. Sorry. Some of the key Matapopore people in the middle is in New Zealand within a Māori sort of sphere. The term auntie is not a sort of diminutive term at all. An auntie is a very respected elder woman within the community. And in the middle there, you'll see Auntie or Dame Auntie Aroha, who was really one of the key trustees who drove this along. She is, she was kind of the heart of mana whenua, very involved in the local decision making, and a wonderful, formidable, scary woman sometimes, but wonderful, yeah. And Tui and Debbie Tikau, so people who were feeding into this process. And you'll see the words ko tākoro te ingoa o te awa nei, nōku tēnei whenua. So nōku tēnei awa is the phrase that's there, and again it's an ancestral saying that has come forward. So bringing forward that notion, the name o tākoro into a central city space. This is our project team. This is what I made Linda and Amanda. We were the sort of project team for the cultural interpretation implementation. So we did this wandering around, particularly along the river corridor, pretending to be signs and so just, going through each of these spaces. So one of the key, well, there were several key things that we were trying to bring forward within the interpretation sort of outcomes. So the idea of elevating te reo Māori, so having dual language where possible, bringing forward dual stories on each of the panels where possible. And sometimes actually prioritizing te reo in certain elements where it was a really key sort of really highly cultural significant space. So we'll see some of those, and bringing names forward as well, similar to Dawn's Mahi that she's doing. The second thing was to identify and celebrate, those places of cultural significance. So we developed these structures called tohu whenua, which were fundamentally for the Indigenous stories, the local stories from Ngāi Tūāhuriri. So the development of the form pointed towards an area of significance. So you'll see that, the dark line sort of actually acts like an arrow towards like an area of interest. On each of the sides, the content was developed by Matapopore. So cultural mapping, you'll see on the left-hand side there. Patterns were developed that were consistent with kaupapa or values that we were using, but you will also see that the elevating of the te reo name and everything phrased in te reo first, with the sort of subsequent translation below. Yeah.
I'll talk a little bit about some of the interpretation panels. This project we had, we've got about half a dozen of the tohu whenua that Kiri mentioned, and then we've got over 40 interpretation panels, but it's in quite a large area. And this was an example of a panel where we took what's a very well-known and memorial that is associated with World War I, and we introduced the Ngāi Tahu story around World War I, which is very little known about Ngāi Tahu soldiers being involved in the First World War, and additionally a really significant part of the history of Aotearoa New Zealand that few people know was that the tribes united in 1835 around a flag, which is shown on this panel, and it also has a World War I connection with Ngāi Tahu. So these are not only bringing new new stories to the fore, but as Kiri said, wherever possible, we tried to tell the stories together rather than separately. Another thing we aimed to do was to bring the modern artists involved if they were happy, so to have contemporary images. And I think this is an area where we have a lot of opportunity and interpretation to be thinking about the contemporary as it reflects the historic, and particularly as we know visual imagery is really important for interpretation, and there are very little, of course, historic images of the 19th century, for example. Kiri was also talking before about, you know, how English and British looking Christchurch is perceived, and this site was a very was a great example of it. It was full of it is full of monuments to the colonial past with Captain James Cook and Queen Victoria. But as part of the rebuild process, a very important and significant set of sculptures was put into this place. And this was something we interpreted on site, and these are sculptures that talk about bringing the mana, and it's something Dawn was talking about earlier before, bringing the mana, the status, the autonomy, back into the city with this sculpture and these sets of sculptures, as well as all the other artworks and buildings. But also talking about, I should say, and also talking about the commitment to being bicultural, recognising Māori as tangata whenua, the people of the land, and recognising those of us like myself who are tangata Tiriti, the people who have the right to live in Aotearoa because our ancestors signed the treaty with Māori. And so again, something really important to embed in these, in a place that has in the past been seen as extremely colonial. Not all of the interpretive stories worked to give due prominence to the Māori side of the Antarctic story, and Antarctica's and travel to Antarctica is a very significant part of Christchurch identity. We have a strong connection with the American Antarctic program, which is based here in Christchurch. And this interpretation, we considered talking about the Māori relationship with the subantarctic islands and navigation in Antarctica, and decided that we couldn't really give it, as I say, due prominence. And we've found another location in the city to do that. The other aspect, we've talked about the cultural markers that identify storytelling. We've talked about the interpretation, and the other element to this is an audio guide. And there will be many different strands to this as we carry on. I'll just take a moment to play one of the pieces.
Sorry, Linda, we don't hear anything on this end.
Okay, so I won't try and make it work. It's just an example of, we've got something like 80 pieces of audio, and 40 of them are mana whenua talking and interpreting these all the artworks and features that have gone into the buildings. We're going to just complete this presentation. I'm just realizing we're getting really close to time, but I think one of the really, I suppose for me, the most interesting thing is that as one of those people trained in the Sam Ham and even the old Tilden way of looking at interpretation, we started off with a very themed approach and writing thematic statements for everything. And it was probably about 4 months in, which that Kerry suddenly pulled me up and said, I'm not really sure this is the right way for us to be approaching something that we're trying to do as a bicultural project. So I'm just going to turn over to Kerry to explain the different way that we looked at it.
Yeah, look, I suppose basically we stepped back from the way that things were being, proposed. So it was a relatively conventional sort of approach through this thematic the thematic development of interpretation. But within Matapopore, we had these, really strong kaupapa or values that we sought to bring forward within any project that we were doing. And so I'll just quickly run through those. But basically, I'll put it forward to the interpretation team, how about we actually take these values and use that as the basis for sort of decision making in terms of where, what content came forward within the project, where panels might sit, and align that with the sort of this European settler stories that were already sort of seeded within the city. And so these ideas of whakapapa, manaakitanga, mahikakai, mana motuhake, and ture wairua were picked up as sort of as the kaupapa to sort of bring forward, and we matched those where we could across the panels so that we had these sort of dual stories coming through. And I think it was just interesting in terms of the sort of editing and selection process, that we always kind of had that as the framework to sort of like test things against. So yeah, you'll see these 5 here. So I think what it meant was that then we could, within the structures themselves, we developed patterns that aligned with those kaupapa. And so each panel would be able to be to carry one of these patterns that, if it was about the river and the restoration of the water quality and the return of species to that place, then we would bring through this mahikakai pattern that reflected sort of the weaving, and this the diamond in the middle was a pātiki or flounder shape that comes through in sort of traditional patterning. So we developed we had someone develop a pattern for each of the values. And so you'll see here that starts to come through in relation to the actual structures. So Linda.
Well, I think Kerry and I have done a lot of talking, and we're running out of time to really go into, I suppose, what we think is really the most interesting part of this whole project, which was really how we came together, and everything that Dawn talked about when she had her slide around authenticity, rings really true from my perspective in terms of, listening, showing respect, being honest, developing relationships. But for me, it's been about realizing, just how different the worldviews are from a European perspective and a Māori perspective, and acknowledging the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know, and that however much I think I might know and understand, I have to constantly remember that it's not my role to, it's important to think and try and understand the values, but I can't ever expect to really be able to express the Māori values in the way that Māori want them to be expressed. And so it's about kind of, for me, it's been about acknowledging that and seeing how I can change my practice to consider those values, but always know that it sits with Māori to hold those true. Yeah, Kiri, do you have any last
Yeah, just to
comments?
add that, look, you know, while I rattled off my iwi at the start, actually my mother's Dutch, and so that's my background. I grew up in a Dutch environment. That's my second language. So just to reiterate, I suppose, what Linda's just said, I've been needing to listen and learn as well, and so I've been really fortunate to be in a position where I've been able to work alongside cultural experts who have the knowledge, who were able to guide the decisions that were being made within the project and make sure that they were tika, you know, they were right for and consistent, I suppose, with a mana whenua worldview. So yeah, I've had the benefit of learning my whakapapa through or expanding whakapapa through these projects, which has been really amazing. But I think the key phrase sort of here is this idea of mana ki te mana, and it's this idea of sort of equality and decision making, that you're working through things side by side, and I just really want to tautoko and well, not tautoko, I just want to say thank you so much to Linda and the team for being open-minded, for listening, and for working through in a way that I think really does justice to this notion of bicultural sort of bringing forward these bicultural environments within urban spaces that often have been a bit devoid of those that sort of side of things. So yeah, just an amazing project team, and it's been a real pleasure to work on. Yeah.
Kia ora. So Lara, I know that we've run out of time. If anybody wants to stay on, and if we can, I think we're welcome to answer any questions.
Yeah, so I'll moderate questions, and there are a few that are in the chat. There's a question and answer tab, and there's also the chat as well, and so I'll keep an eye on both of those. But we already have a few from Michael, and he was asking Linda and Carrie, well, he's asking a couple of questions. What percentage of the New Zealand population is Maori? And then some questions about, do we know what percentage of people speak Maori and what percentage of non-Maori people speak Maori, and whether or not it's taught in schools? So I don't know who wants to address that question. I don't know that anyone knows numbers. Does anyone know numbers?
Kiri, you go ahead.
I'm always really reluctant to talk about percentages because suddenly everything gets reduced to that. Yes. But in the interests of, I believe it's around about 15% of the population identify as Māori. There's probably more, I would think, but we have gone through a bit of a time of 150 years of cultural erosion, and it's meant that a lot of people who would have had stronger connections to their marae and to whānau have dispersed and kind of lost that cultural connection. So I don't 15% is a sort of the government statistics number. What was the second part of that?
Well, just wondering how many people speak the reo, and I guess I've in the last 10 years that I've been living in New Zealand, I've seen a huge change here. So I think again, percentage is probably the best way to answer this question. But if you want to speak a little bit to the revitalization of Te Reo, that from your perspective, Carrie, that'd be interesting.
Sure. So from the sort of 1970s and 1980s, there was a real sort of desire, I suppose, or a recognition that Te reo Māori was a dying language. So, you know, there was this real grassroots push to bring te reo back into communities, and it started in these kohanga reo, or the, you know, in the sort of kindergarten, sort of early childhood learning sort of ways. And basically it relied on the nannies, you know, the older women would come into these environments with young kids and speak te reo to them. So that sort of started at that point as a sort of an effort to sort of keep the language alive. So I don't know the exact percentages, but it was just, you know, it was in a pretty dire sort of state. My nanny she spoke te reo fluently. My dad knows te reo, but he can't speak it because he was punished at school for speaking te reo. And the times when he has spoken it, I've seen him, he's just got really emotional and you know, choked up. So it's again, we've had this incredible loss of language, and so that's why it is so important to bring te reo into these sort of everyday public realm sort of spaces to start to normalize it. And that was you know, that was really something that we talked about a lot during the project, was how do we bring te reo into these panels in a way that is accessible, I suppose, to a wider audience, to people who don't speak te reo, but also you know, also have these opportunities to kind of provide te reo within context. So, you know, the idea of on the tohu whenua in particular, of actually having the phrasing, all of the phrasing in te reo was really important, so that when you take language out of, or when you place one language within another, the context changes, and the meaning of those words is never quite what it was meant to be in the original kind of context. So yeah, and in terms of language learners, we've got a lot of there are a lot of Pākehā that are learning, or non-Māori, sorry, who are learning te reo in the wānanga. So I would think probably it's possibly around about 70 to 80% of the students are actually non-Māori in these language learning sort of situations. So it's, you know, becoming pretty apparent that, you know, that you know, there is a wide interest in language. And but sorry, one last thing, there is also, and I think Dawn touched on this, and Linda possibly did too, there are sort of, what do you call it? There are criticisms of the use of te reo within these panels, and quite vehement sometimes. And yeah, so it's just interesting at the time that we're in. Some people are open, others are not so much. Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask Dawn for you to speak to that a little bit, because that, you know, the revitalization of te reo, it's a huge part of the kaupapa of your project. So is there anything you want to say about that in relation to Te Kete Rukuruku? I mean, and I guess one other just tidbit that might be helpful for the international audience is to know that the New Zealand te reo is a national language. And so in support of that, the New Zealand government does sponsor te reo courses for anyone living in New Zealand, residents of New Zealand. And so you can take te reo courses for free in New Zealand. They are in very high demand in here in Wellington. It can sometimes be hard to get into a course. But I've seen a huge change myself, like I said, in understanding the language. And I think most people are familiar with words like mana and whakapapa and things like that. And it's becoming more a part of our normal lexicon and language. Yeah. So Dawn, do you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Lara. I think you covered that off beautifully, actually, you and Kiri. Yeah, the overwhelming reaction to the mahi that we're doing has been supportive, and there certainly is a huge impetus to learn te reo and understand it. So yeah, there's always going to be a few, hopefully eventually that will get less and less over time, that don't support it. I think I don't know that it's my place to go into personal reasons for that, although you can make some assumptions about why that is. But I think, yeah, overall, our support has been really strong for the return of te reo. For the we do, though, to I guess to qualify that, is most of the naming that we are doing is dual naming. So we're not actually taking away the English name of a site or the English history. We're not removing that in any way. We are adding to it. So I personally think it's incredibly difficult to justify an argument against adding a beautiful history and narrative and meaning to a site and a story that you may not have been aware of before. The way that is done and managed, I think it makes it a lot more difficult for people to have a rational objection to what we're doing. It makes them all look a bit silly, really, if you're going to argue with that. That's my personal view, and part of, I think, is what's worked quite well in the program. We have had some areas where the English name has been removed, and that's been fine, but it's generally where there isn't really much of a history to the name or to the English story of that site. So it was felt that nothing would be lost, we'd only be adding to it. So yeah, and yeah, it's gone really well, I think. Yeah, we haven't had huge amounts of negative feedback at all. It's been really supportive and open. And I think that the vast majority of people are quite welcoming to learn a bit more about their culture, be part of it, to embrace it and welcome it. Yeah, it's definitely getting stronger and stronger in New Zealand, which is fantastic. It's been amazing for me just being in the program. I have personally learned so much, and it's been a real privilege to be involved and to be able to be a part of it. Yeah. You're on mute, Lara.
You're on mute, Lara.
I've got a question for the people who are still here, because having lived in the New Zealand context now for about a decade, this is the revitalization of language and the use of te reo and returning of place names has become quite normalized in New Zealand. And I guess I'm wondering how this is playing out on an international level. I'm wondering if anyone could tell me, is this something that isn't happening or is happening other places? And Dawn, in particular, I thought your the slide that you're talking about these knowledge labels and how do you protect intellectual property? I know that's a real issue, and the idea of introducing these knowledge labels. So I'm kind of curious if anyone in the chat could post about whether or not they know of any projects like this happening in their country and what they think of those knowledge labels and whether they have anything similar happening in their country. And while we're waiting for that, I guess one other thing to touch on is that the population demographic of Christchurch and Auckland, or Ōtautahi and Tamaki Makaurau, are quite different. And there are a lot of Māori living in Tamaki Makaurau and fewer living in Ōtautahi. And so I'm wondering if Linda and Carrie, if you have had a similar experience to Dawn in the reaction, or if the reaction has been different in Ōtautahi.
I mean, talking about place naming and that we are also doing in Ōtautahi, yeah, let's be honest, there's still a lot of old racists out there, and there's a lot of pushback, and while we have well, I think we all have a future-looking, aspirational desires for a bicultural country, and we're trying to be part of that. There's still a lot of deep colonial racism here, and I think we'd be wrong to deny that, even if people are keeping it to themselves. There's still, yes, that's still out there. But we are fortunate that we have the law behind us, and as well as Dawn said, the desire to share these amazing stories. But having the treaty that was, signed in 1840, Te Tiriti, and how it's now enshrined in so many laws, we have always that to stand on, and I must say that makes a huge difference, to be able to say, well, I'm responding to my responsibility as a treaty partner in doing this work. Okay.
Yeah. So just to follow up on that, Ngāi Tūāhuriri, who have been involved in this sort of city work, 100%, stand by the notion of treaty partnership. And this is not about, unseating or, removing kind of the English influences within the city, but really it's about complementing and, finding those opportunities to tell these shared stories and shared histories. So that notion of kind of that partnership that has played out over, since the treaty was signed is like really fundamental to a Tūāhuriri sort of way of thinking. So I think it creates a really interesting environment to work within, because standing back from Christchurch, from Ōtautahi, we have these histories that are difficult, that we need to negotiate and navigate, and actually finding ways to kind of sort of own up to that, I suppose, is something that can happen through interpretation frameworks. So I think there'll be it's a difficult we don't want to have to deal with kind of difficult stories, but actually it is part of the history, and being able to find ways that does that, that isn't kind of, that is not threatening, and is just honest, I suppose, about where we are, or what we've come through and where we are is the ideal. So yeah, it's, Christchurch is Christchurch. It will always be Christchurch, but it's also Ōtautahi, and it has been for many, before it was named Christchurch. So that's
yeah, and I hear it often talked about, I think that getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is really the important part here, of, just leaning into that. We do have a few things coming through the chat right now about, so Anto says that in Mexico, they have a community museum system with Indigenous perspectives, but it's not a regular practice. And there are very few compared with the possibilities they think they can find in Mexico. Michael Glenn said that from his experience, interest in and support for Native or Indigenous languages is seen in many countries from Hawaii and other US states, East and West, including, for example, the Sami in Northern Sweden, Norway, etc. There's a European Bureau of Lesser Used Languages. Welsh has equal status with English in Wales, Gaelic, and to a lesser extent, Scots have official and legal support in Scotland. So that's two interesting perspectives. Does anyone else have any more questions? Otherwise, I realize we're over time. I am so thankful to Dawn and Linda and Carrie for being here today and for sharing these projects. And I hope, we've got one more. So Alice said that in Bolivia, which calls itself a plurinational national state, The quite new cable car stations in the capital La Paz got only names in the Aymara language. That's great. So it's good to hear, really good to hear that this is happening across the world and that this isn't only happening in New Zealand. And one of the things I think is great for these webinars is an opportunity for us to share our experiences. And that was what we were hoping to do here today. And I'm sure that Linda and Carrie and Dawn would be more than willing to answer more questions if you have them. And if you do want to, I'll put my email in the chat and if you do have more questions, just pop them through to us and we'll be happy to talk to them. With that, I'll hand it back over to you, Paul and Son, to just close us out for the session. Paul and Son, are you there?
Probably having a coffee.
Yes, so they may have popped out for coffee, but we'll go ahead and close up now. And thank you everyone who was able to join us.
I heard you calling, but I was getting off a phone call. I apologize for being MIA here. So thank you so much for this, and really enjoyed what I was able to hear of the presentation, and look forward to going back and watching the rest on the recording.
Great, thank you. Oh yes, Carrie, would you possibly leave us with a closing karakia? Sorry, I meant to do that.
That's quite all right. Yeah. Look, I'd be delighted to. Thank you everyone for your input. It's been a great session. Really, really great to see you again, Linda. We don't get to kind of hang out that much. And to everyone from kind of all over the place, all over the world, fantastic to sort of have your comments coming through and to see that there are similar things happening in other places. So yeah, so I'll just finish with a closing karakia, so just to sort of round things off. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou ariki a ihu karaite, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhenga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake. Āmeni.
Āmeni. Thank you, everyone.